Quicker than I was this morning. Please open your Bibles to Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12 is where we'll start this morning. The disabled list is quite profound this morning, but we're glad that we have some visitors with us. Hopefully you can stick around and give us a chance to get to know you. We're studying in the Gospel of Luke chapter 12. Before we begin, our brother John Osborne is going to say a prayer for us.
God, my Father in heaven, gathered here, Father, this morning, come and worship and serve you, to learn of your word, and to render unto you the praise and honor that you so deserve. We know, Father, that we are lacking in giving you what you are so worthy of. But we pray that you would accept our worship and our study here today. We pray, Father, that you be with Mark and the other teachers as they present your word to us, and that you would help them to present it in a pure, simple, understanding way, and help us, Father, to have the hearts and minds to grasp your word and your truth, and to make application to our lives, that we might come to understand it better and to mold and shape our lives after your will. Pray, Father, for those who remember that there's many who are suffering illness and affliction at this time. We ask that you give them a rapid recovery for the things that they are suffering, and those that are treating them, give them the proper treatment and care that will bring them back to the fullness of their health. Pray that you would accept our service and accept our worship. For this we pray in Jesus' name.
Amen. Thank you, brother. So, according to Luke chapter 12, verses 8 to 12, let's just jump right into it. What do Christians have going for them if we are willing to confess our belief in Jesus? He will confess us. To who? Well, it doesn't say that. It says the messengers of God, the angels of God, the heavenly scene, of course, before the Father. So, what kind of confidence does that give you, Theophilus? What happens when they're going to drag you in front of the tribunal? What happens if they're going to drag you in front of the magistrates? What happens when they arrest you and throw you in jail? What, is that going to cause you great pause? Well, of course it is, but what? Who's on your side? When we confess Him. Now, does that just mean I believe Jesus is the Son of God? A confession, like belief and repentance and baptism and every other aspect of our entrance into the kingdom, is much broader than a one-time snapshot. Confession is a way of life. And what he's saying here is if it's not our way of life, beware. Now, why was the rich fool a rich fool?
Because he's not putting his trust in the right things.
Is there anything wrong with having a 401k? Can you treat your 401k like an idol? Oh, yeah. How do you tell the difference? We don't have that kind of time, do we? But it's always something to consider. Always. Who are we putting? If we're not rich toward God, you're not going to be able to buy your way into anything. So why not be anxious? Yes, we went all through all of this on Wednesday night, but he tells his disciples, don't be anxious. And anytime Jesus says, don't be afraid, don't be anxious, what does that mean? There's something to be afraid about, or there could be something serious that you could be anxious about. What were some of the anxiety issues here in Luke chapter 12?
Knowing what to say when the time came.
Well, at the very base of it, it's your life. what you're wearing, what you're eating, how it's going. You ever been anxious about that? I am. So Jesus says, don't be. So when it happens, what's that a cue for us? When the lights start going off and start flashing, what's that a cue for disciples to do? Remember who you are. Remember who's on your side. The confidence that we should be having as disciples of Christ. But I don't have control of my thoughts. Does the disciple say that? 2 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul talks about bringing every thought into the captivity of Christ. How are we doing on that? You can't keep a bird from flying across your face, but you can keep it from nesting in your head. Right? There are thoughts that are going to go through our mind that are not helpful, that are anxiety-inducing, but as a disciple, we do have, with the confidence of God and with God's presence in our lives, apparently we can control most of our thoughts. I said most because somebody's going to come to me, but Mark, you don't understand. And you know what? You're exactly right. I don't understand how your thoughts are going. I don't understand. I don't know the perilous journey that you've been through to come in and sit next to me on the pew this morning. We don't know what the journey has been, but we do know what the Lord said. And He says, why is it hard to control our thoughts?
Our adversary is always working on us.
I'm sorry, Carla?
Our adversary is always working.
Oh, yeah. He's always lobbing grenades at us. Jim?
The Lord said that you're not going to have temptations which you cannot overcome.
Well, Philippians 4 talks about having the peace of God. And then when things get rough, think on these several things.
Have you ever dealt with a disciple who had peace that was almost covet-worthy? He said, don't covet your neighbor's mule, okay? Don't covet your neighbor's house or his wife or their boat or their skills at quilting. You know, I tried to go title down there. Sorry, I failed. So how do you get to the point where this peace of God, this confidence of God that we've been talking about in this review, that you actually have that? How does that come? Craig?
Only through maturity and preparation. It's one of the things he's going to talk about a little bit later in the same chapter about that being ready. And, you know, that we all understand how to use certain devices and certain things. I mean, we understand that when, you know, if we're going to be in an accident or we want to be prepared in a car, we may have a first aid kit or a spare tire. But if we don't avail ourselves of the need to be familiar with how those things work and how they operate, how effective are we going to be when the time comes when we need to employ them? And, you know, this, you know, is the same type of thing. You know, it's not going to come by accident. It's not going to come on a whim. We have to put the effort in.
Because it is the Father's good pleasure to take care of us, to give us the kingdom. That's what He says. And so He says our part in that is getting ready. Jennifer? Sorry.
We also need to understand that we need to give grace to people who, because of chemical imbalances and things like that.
That's why I said most. Because.
Right. And, you know, understanding that there are going to be moments for them that are just like a person who's in pain doesn't react reasonably.
Sure.
The mind doesn't allow them to.
All the more the reason Jesus says don't judge hypocritically and beyond that. Joel?
We are inherently, they talk about it and they acknowledge it, that we all will fall short.
Mhm.
It's just the way we're made, is sometimes you're going to have that, and the Lord is giving us, you know, coping mechanisms of how to go through those times, because everybody's going to have it.
Mm-hmm.
In one aspect or another, you're going to have, anxiety, you're going to have loss of confidence, you're going to have stray thoughts like, oh, get out of my head, you know. And everybody reacts emotionally, you know, inappropriately sometimes.
And all of that teaches us to do what with our relationship with God? Keep working on it and draw closer. And don't sit in the middle of your anxiety and your fear and your lack of achieving and tell yourself the lie of you're not worthy. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. The scriptures teach us that we are valuable toward God, that we must confess His name, and when we do, does that solve all the problems? Is that like taking a pill? All of a sudden we got peace? There we go. Second snap's always better. Do we just immediately get peace right from that point? No. We have to preach to ourselves that Jesus has confessed me before the Father. Because I have confessed His name, because I trust in Him, because I am valuable enough to Him. Because there is this battle, this tug of war that goes on in our soul. But in the process of that battle going on for our soul, to Craig's point, verse 35 of chapter 12, question number 12 asks, why must we be ready? Duh. What do we do to get ready? Pardon?
Discipline ourselves.
Discipline ourselves. What else?
Continue in faith.
Mm-hmm.
It says stay in contact with God at all times.
Mm-hmm.
The good, the bad, the ugly.
Mm-hmm. Are there easier times in your life to draw closer to the Lord? If you didn't pack it all for your trip until 30 minutes before you got in the car, how well would that have gone? Wait. Maybe assuming facts, not in evidence here. I'm assuming you did.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good.
There would have been.
So if that hadn't have happened and it's 30 minutes before you leave, how would that have gone?
Not well.
What if you start packing 15 minutes after you should have left? That doesn't work, does it? So why do we suppose that if we wait to the middle of pain, if we wait to the middle of anxiety, if we wait to the middle of pressure, if we wait to the middle of something wrong to call on God, and then our faith isn't as responsive, why do we suppose that that's the way it works? Proactivity is always better than reactive. We can't always foresee everything that's coming, but being proactive in our faith is necessary. Brandon and Lawrence.
I was going to say, I can't speak for anybody else, but
Yeah, you can, but
in my instance, or occasion, I've found that it's very difficult to want to exercise a muscle that you don't use very often. So because you may not be experiencing a certain feeling or pain, it may seem kind of unnecessary because I think some of us are naturally lazy to not want to worry about
see,
it.
you can't speak for others. It's just you and me, brother. But anyway.
No, that was all.
But how much does it take to get? What is inertia? You know, Mark, going into science class today. Bodies at rest. Stay at rest. Bodies in motion. Stay in motion. Welcome to science class. Oh wait, it's also Bible class. Because the creator of the physical world is also how the spiritual world says. So your faith needs to be in motion. And not looking back. That's a couple of chapters back. Lawrence, what'd you have?
I say proactivity is a nicety to have if you're born and raised in the church. But most people are introduced to God usually in the midst of pain. I think that's why God lets us go through it.
But even then, the decision is a proactive rather than just sitting and wallowing, or the decision is always active because our God is always there ready to help. And then once you get started, I always make the analogy of our Y membership. in January. January 2nd, the Y is the busiest place in Valparaiso. On February the 16th, it's not. Because good intent, how far do good intentions get us? Greg, do you have a point?
I do.
Okay. So there's a long parable that Jesus teaches. Peter asked him 41, are we the only people you speak in parables to? You speak them to, why then? Who is that faithful steward? Why in verse 49 do we get this idea of the cost of discipleship and a faithful steward? Well, what is the point of this long-running teaching? Here at the end of Luke chapter 4. He tells us to be ready. And then what's the servant supposed to do? Verse 43 and following.
Do what's expected.
Why?
Because there will be an account one day.
So what happens if you wait till 15 minutes after the car leaves? You're going to miss it. It's going to be harried. It's going to be scattered. Now, there are going to be some days that you just forget. I mean, this is not a general rule. But there is a general rule in what is expected from stewards. A servant who knew his master's will and did not do it. What's the master going to say to that person?
Depart from me.
Why? Why is God so mean? It's not mean, it's accountable. Who's responsible for you? Are there helps? Well, of course there are. Of course there are helps. We're blessed with so many of them. And the church sometimes is a great safety net. But what happens if you fall through the safety net? Who's responsible for me? Me. And then he says, oh, and by the way, not everybody's going to appreciate this. I came to bring peace. Well, yeah, he did, but that's not what he's saying here, is it? He says, if you got 5, how many? Wait. Sometimes it's 3 against 2, sometimes it's 2 against 3. Why? Why is he warning us, Theophilus? Y'all are going to get tired of that. I don't care.
There are going to be people in your own household that could be against what is right.
Isn't this the good thing to do, to tell somebody that when you buy into this, when you believe this, when you trust in this, this is not going to be a worldwide acceptance of this. In fact, 53, father will be divided against son, son against father, mother against daughter. And he's not just talking about your wedding when your mama didn't like the place setting. Sorry, hope you didn't have that. My mom didn't care. This is much more important. We're talking about a way of life here. So if Great Aunt Sally doesn't like your faith, what are you supposed to do? And be faithful to your Lord. And don't be surprised when Great Aunt Sally or any other nondescript family member, don't let that division, don't let that dissonance dissuade you from being faithful to the Lord. How hard is that?
without God's grace, it's impossible.
It would be very difficult. Well, Lawrence, I'm gonna be that guy. Even with God's grace, it's very difficult. But is there a positive side to this, 1 Peter 3? Ladies, if your husband isn't faithful, what can you do?
Remain loyal to God so that by your good behavior you may win him over.
And we can Title IX that one too. So if your wife isn't faithful, you can win her over. Because there is this battle for our mind. We have an adversary who is against us, who wants us to quit, who wants us to fear, he wants us to be lazy, he wants all of this, but we also have a God who, if we will confess him, he's on our side. Who do you need more than God? Well, the Bible class member would say, nobody. But who do you have? Well, we've got him, he's on our side, and we need to be wise. He looks at him at the end of the chapter and he says, y'all can tell the weather by which way the wind's blowing. Yeah, you can't tell what's going on right in front of your face. What was going on right in front of their face?
God was present in front of them.
This is a very specific context here. What was Jesus doing right in front of them?
Miracles.
And is the pot bubbling? The pot's bubbling, right? Because the detractors and the naysayers are getting lined up. And as they continue to get lined up, he says to his disciples, don't be surprised when this happens. Don't be surprised when this happens. In fact, he's already told them, he says, what's going to happen at the end doesn't look like victory. The Son of Man is going to be persecuted and killed and raised the third day. He's already planted that seed. Now, the plant has not grown yet. He calls them hypocrites in verse 56. So in verses 57, 58, and 59, he asks them to do something. Again, in a very specific context. Why does he say to settle with the accuser? Why do the insurance companies want to settle with you when it's their responsibility to pay you? Why do they want to settle? Get done with their responsibility and go on. So, how hard are you going to fight for that property line? I remember when we were purchasing a truck for our son, and the guy said yes to an offer. Oh, could have got a better deal. Sometimes that's the way people approach life. They think there's always a better deal out there that they can hold out. They can hold out for. But in this scenario, when you're out there and when you're about ready to be strung up or run out of town or kicked out of the synagogue or whatever is going on, as you stand up for the Lord, be careful what you fight for. Settle with your accuser. Because what's going to happen? Verse 59.
Could go very bad for you.
So be wise. He's telling us to use our brain. There's a lot of folks that want to check their brains at the door when they come into church. And just lap up everything that's said. Can you lap up everything that's said by everybody? Are the sayings of Jesus going to be difficult enough at times to apply? Yeah. Be wise. Be thoughtful. Use your brain. But always yield to the one who is teaching you. So in chapter 13, he got some news. In 13, 1-5, he got some news. What was the news? What had Pilate done? I'm sorry. Jack?
He killed a number of Galileans while they had their sacrifice.
Okay, so where did the Galileans take their sacrifices? In the temple. They were worshiping in the temple, and what did the Roman do? Man, they must have been bad if the government was after them. If the government arrested them and killed them like that, they must have been some notorious evil people. And how many people knew that? Well, I saw it on the news. When they told me that, I just knew they had to be bad. And then those people, did you hear about all those people where the tower fell on them? Man, God must have wanted them dead really bad. Why do people do that? To explain things they can't explain. That's why people do that. We try to find some sense in life. Does everything that happened in life make sense? There might be a reason, but we don't know it. Sometimes, you know why sometimes some things happen? It's because we're stupid and we do the wrong things. You know why sometimes other things happen? We have no idea. And we try to make judgments about them and us and everybody else, and we say all this, and then Jesus says, here's your go-to. Here's your default setting. If something bad happens to somebody, what does a believer do?
Pray for them, trust God.
And what is repentance? It says, repent or perish. What does it mean to repent? It means turn toward God. So when something terrible happens, Theophilus, what do? You turn toward God. Why? Is he going to explain everything? You know in that song, he's going to make it all clear one day. What's going to be clear one day? God is. Jesus is. That's what's going to be clear. Now, when Great Aunt Sally ran that red light and struck that other car and it caused irreparable financial harm to the rest of the family, why did God allow that to happen to me? Who knows? There might be a time when we can figure all that out. But when bad things happen, when good things happen, what's all of this supposed to do if you're a lover of God? That's what Theophilus means. If you're a lover of God, what's all of this supposed to do for us?
Make you stronger, test you.
Now, what does the adversary say? Well, God must not love you. God must not care. Why would God allow this to happen to me? Maybe the answer is so that you'll draw closer to me. That you'll come closer to me and draw closer, and in drawing closer to me, you'll have more confidence to live a life that glorifies me, rather than wonder that worries, well, I don't really know if he cares or not. Because if we continue along that path, what's going to happen? Verse 5. If we continue wondering if God is or if God cares, what happens at the end of that? Perish. Nobody wants that to happen. We got a tree. 2/3 of it was dying. And then we had that storm that one night a month or so ago. And I walk by that tree now where most of it's gone, and there's a couple of apples on it. It's looking kind of nasty. Cindy wanted me to cut down that tree. Speaking of lazy. She wanted me to cut down that tree, but right after it happened. It's unsightly. I'm going to cut down the tree one of these days. What happened with the fig tree? How many years did it go? If I let that apple tree go, if I let that apple tree go for 3 years, I'm not going to let it go for 3 years. What do we learn about a fig tree? This is not talking about trees. What do sometimes we want to do with people? Well, that's obviously what happened to Galilee and Siloam, right? God got rid of them, right? No. In fact, what's Jesus teaching us about God here? He doesn't want the tree cut down. He doesn't want you to be cut down. He is going to be patient with you. We don't know the rest of the story, do we? But if we were able the next year and the fig tree still wasn't producing figs, what would the steward say to his master? Yes, sir. Right away, sir. You go get my axe. They didn't have ornamental fruit trees back in the day. Things were grown for a reason. What's a fig tree supposed to do? What's a Christian supposed to do? Draw toward God. So this woman, this crippled woman, we're in verse 10 now, chapter 13. How long had she had this malady? This disabling spirit? 18 years. I got a crick in my neck for 3 days and I'm about ready to blow up. I'm just like, you see, when those of you that are younger, if you sleep wrong, one of these days you're going to live with sleeping wrong for a week. And it's a pain in the neck. See what I did there? I'll be here all week. Anyway, 18 years. What hope does she have after 18 years of getting well, Dr. Luke? If she had money, what do you suppose she probably did with it? Just like the woman with the flow of blood a couple chapters back. What do you suppose?
Spent it on all kinds of doctors.
All kinds of doctors, and chiropractors, and acupuncturists, and how much help did all... Now, I'm not throwing all of them in the same level or throwing them all in the same boat, because I know your acupuncturist saved you from all sorts of back trouble. I know. But it's interesting, who has caused this? We know what Jesus did, but what I want to get to is, who caused this, according to Jesus? Satan has had her in bondage for 18 years. So which is it? Is it a health malady? Is it a disabling spirit? Is it Satan's fault? We can get too sciencey, y'all. We can get too sciencey, figuring that there's a pill or an acupuncturist or a chiropractor that's going to save us. What's the point in all of this? Does God have power? And whether he uses it on us or not, because there's probably more people than this poor woman. What was the point of him healing this poor daughter of Abraham? And then, in the midst of all of this, by the way, when did this happen? On a Sabbath day. Lid on the pot, rattling. It's rattling now because, who gets mad? The ruler of the synagogue, probably a Pharisee. What did he do? He was indignant. What does that mean? Does that mean he was ticked off? No, it's a whole lot more than ticked off, right? He was spitting mad. Why? Why did he get mad? He had profaned the Sabbath. Jesus said, let me ask you a question. Your mule gets loose. You going to go get it? Well, of course, there were allowances, right? There were allowances in the law of Moses about that. He said, who do you suppose is more important, a daughter of Abraham or your mule? He's wanting them to, he's trying to get them to think differently. Chapter 12 and 13 is trying to get us to think differently about our anxiety, about our fear, about whether God's with us or not, or what happens when bad things happen. He's trying to get us to change the way that we think about situations and people, so that we'll listen So ought not, this is verse 16, so ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound, think about it, for 18 years, be loosed from the bond on the Sabbath? And the indignant synagogue chairman probably would go, well, I mean, it's obvious. This is a rhetorical question. He really wasn't asking him. The answer is obvious. Well, of course, this should happen. Did he like it? The leader of the synagogue? Why didn't he like it? Remember back in chapter 12 when he talked about division? I didn't come to bring peace but a sword. I came to bring division. Because it's a challenge to believe in Jesus. Sometimes I think we believe in this fairy tale, Mr. Rogers' gospel, that everybody, it's just going to be wonderful. That's not how it works. When a kingdom changes, there's a battle, and there's a battle going on, and it's not just against demons. It's not just against Satan. Who else is bound by Satan? I didn't ask you this question, but I'll ask you right now. Who else is bound by Satan in this scenario, and probably for longer than 18 years? The leader of the synagogue. Wait, but he was religious. He believed in God.
Mark, is a lot like the previous incident where, Jesus healed the man with a withered hand on the Sabbath in the synagogue. In this scenario, the same thing happens, is that the man didn't ask, the woman didn't ask. He looked at them, and he's the one that draws attention to what it is and has the compassion in order to do what he can in order to heal those two people. And again, to make and to serve as an example of all days, why shouldn't God's people be delivered on the Sabbath day? Because that is what it's about.
Mm-hmm. So what happens if you're trying to talk to somebody about the Lord and they get indignant? Do you just give up on them? Fig tree? Do you give up on them, fig tree? No. Because what might happen? Rick's father-in-law, this Rick, not that Rick, this Rick's father-in-law, when he was confronted with the truth of the gospel, sought to prove the messenger wrong and became a disciple of Christ. So beware, lest in your judgments of those who are indignant against you or the Tower of Siloam falling, that you treat them like a fig tree. Wow, that was kind of an odd weaving there, wasn't it? But I think it weaves okay. As a believer of God, as a lover of God, we need to be trained by God, not just to take our assumptions, like the leader of the synagogue. Because, like a mustard seed, what can the truth of the gospel do in your heart and in your life? How much yeast does it take to make a whole bunch of bread? Just a little bit. What's the point? I thought leaven was bad. Depends on where you get it from, right? If it's the leaven of the gospel, put it in that lump of dough. If it's the leaven of the Pharisees, context is important. How far will the kingdom grow? Fill the earth. Verse 23. Can you believe we're already at Luke chapter 13, verse 23? Well, this chapter only has 35 verses. If I had a shot to get to the end of a chapter, it was today. Will there be few saved? Then one said to him, Lord, are there few who are saved? And he said, what did he say? When the master of the house had risen up and shut the door, verse 25. Somebody going to be standing outside knocking, saying, Lord, 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 Lord. Is calling him Lord enough? Wait, we heard you. We listened to you. We were around at church services. What will the master say? We've been getting snippets of the Sermon on the Mount that we're more accustomed to reading in Matthew 5 to 7. And Luke has them interspersed at different times and in his teachings, which means he didn't just say that in Matthew 5 to 7 at that one opportunity. There were different times and situations where these lessons were repeated. Where will people come from to be saved? When he says the east and the west, the north and the south, what does he mean? He means the whole world, well, of course. But what does that mean to a Jew?
They're not the only ones.
No, they're not. Lover of God, Theophilus, Greek name. You can be part of this kingdom. This leaven can touch your heart. It can rise up there. This whole last and first thing. Cindy's got a couple of kids in her class this year who are bound and determined to be first. Is there anything wrong with trying to be first? I'm not going to try to break any HIPAA laws here by going any further in that story because we got some parents over here. Is there anything wrong with trying to be first? No. Not at all. What happens if it becomes an idol to you? Because sometimes what does it take to be first? You got to be putting others down. We were blessed in a tourist situation one time to have a good spot watching a glacier. And this little Japanese woman came in, and man, she elbowed me and got right underneath me. I'm like, man. Then I thought, I don't live in a place where there's 400,000 people per square meter. Sometimes in India, if you don't get on the bus, if you don't fight, you're not getting on the bus, right? This whole last first thing is a disciple. He's not talking about being first in line. He's not talking about you had it worse than somebody else when they tell you a story about how bad they felt. What does this first and last mean? Rick, what you got?
Think of kids picking positions for baseball or football. You ask, who wants to be right field? And nobody says anything. Who wants to be a catcher? Nobody says anything. But who wants to be a pitcher? And they all step forward.
Or shortstop.
Or shortstop, yeah. They all step forward. Same with football. Who wants to be the quarterback? They all want that.
Yes, sir.
I was going to say that I think it speaks to having the desire to always want to be served versus understanding that sometimes you need to be the person that is serving.
What do we think of servants? What does the world think of servants?
Belittling yourself.
Let's say your daughter comes up to you and says, I love it. I love it when the trash guys come by and pick up our garbage. I think that's really cool. I want to work for the trash company when I grow up. What's every self-respecting 21st century American mom and dad going to say?
I'm sorry, I was laughing because Alexander said that.
Did he really? That's funny. We always say aim higher, right? And sometimes in America, you can do anything you want to do. That's not a bad way to raise your children, because it might be laziness and not wanting to work, or thinking it's an easy job, or thinking there's an easy way out. But if our life gets wrapped up in firstness, it can be detrimental to the mind of a disciple. Because what did the creator of the universe do? This is the teaching point. Jesus, as creator of the universe, what did he do? Serve. And gave up his rightful place. As Americans, what can our rights do? Can't they become idols? And what are we willing to give up in order to be a disciple? At the teaching of Jesus, where are the last going to be? Who has he been talking about this whole time? Who have been the heroes of the stories? I remember I ran on that rant about something that's going to happen a few chapters later when we were talking about the prodigal son or the Samaritan or all of the... Who are the heroes so far in the gospel other than Jesus? Isn't it the last? Thanks, everybody. We'll try to finish chapter 13, good Lord willing.